Hello and welcome to the EFN Presents review of Season 4, Episode 21, Testing, 1, 2, 3. With me this week is Kibby.
Hey, what's up?
So this episode starts off with Twilight and Rainbow Dash, and that's a character pairing I don't think we've seen a lot of in the show. We've usually seen more Applejack and Rarity, or Applejack and Rainbow Dash, and those characters contrast well, their personalities kind of clash. I really think that in this episode, Twilight and Rainbow Dash do contrast. I mean, that's the first act that we see. Did you think that they were going to use that more, or what were your expectations going into this episode?
My expectations were kind of like what happened when Rainbow Dash injured her wing back in one of the earlier seasons when Twilight was able to get her into reading. I thought going into it, when I started watching the episode, I thought the way Twilight started handling the episode in the beginning, Rainbow Dash was going to actually end up liking, even though she hated it at the beginning.
Well, that's something, talking to Reldan from EFN News earlier, that we both agreed, if this had been any other show, that's the way that it would have gone. One episode that came up from The Simpsons was Bart Gets an F. Do you remember that one at all, or...?
I'm sure I've probably seen it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head.
That was the episode where Bart needed to pass this exam where he was going to be held back a grade.
Okay, I think I remember it now.
Yeah, and that's the one where he seals himself. They have a snow day, and he seals himself off in his room, and he's just beating his head against this book, and he's like, I just can't do it, and he's praying and doing everything. He's crying, he's breaking down, and ultimately at the end, he just manages to pass by beating his head against the book long enough. And this episode, like this show, I love it, and I think that a lot of people like the fact that they said, no, that's not the way that you have to learn, right? That classical classroom setting, that's what Twilight is, expositing the virtues of earlier on. That's the Act 1, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's really great that they show that too, because I can almost relate to Rainbow Dash on this, because I could sit and lecture for hours in some of my college classes and pretty much learn nothing. But then when I do other methods on trying to learn the material, I learn it in a snap. So it's just another one of those cool things where they're really showing in this show that it's so relatable.
Well, it's realistic, that because that's just how people are, and it's not just an episode of learning of how to pass an exam. I mean, a lot of it, even though that doesn't seem to be the focus, really is Dash's reaction through this entire process, right?
Yeah, and it's definitely, they really wanted to bring out one of the sides of Rainbow Dash at the beginning of the episode where, it was her confident side where she kept trying to reassure Twilight that she already knew all the material and the test was going to be no issue at all.
Well, that's a good attitude to take, though. And maybe I was a little biased in terms of how the episode started off because of Dash's attitude as she was getting a little more dejected is, even if you know the material, the attitude that you go into something is almost as important as the preparation for it. Where you have people that, like in university, you're going into exams and people keep saying, man, I don't know this. Whether you do or not, the time you're walking in the door, it's too late to do anything. So you can't give yourself that negative attitude,
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been interesting if they had kind of tied that in a bit to the episode, but I can't blame them for not doing that. I think that they used the time effectively.
At the beginning of the episode, Twilight, doing all of her stuff, trying to show her how, I think it's really interesting to see how Rainbow Dash kind of reacts to it. And you can, it's just another one of those things where they really bring out her character. Like, she has issues paying attention during the lectures. She starts goofing off and messing around with Spike, and she does everything wrong that Twilight's trying to tell her to do, like highlighting the book. She highlights everything in the book.
Something I think a lot of people have done. Usually I was not one to highlight, but...
They even threw the soccer ball gag with Ashley Ball's character holding another soccer ball again.
Well, that first act, I think that they definitely drive home a lot of the attitude towards that classical classroom setting again, because Twilight is going to the board with the chalk and she's all excited. She's like, time to experience the magic of learning. And as Rainbow Dash is goofing off a nice little bit of vocabulary, that lackadaisical, which I guess is lacking enthusiasm and determination, carelessly lazy, and that's, I guess you could say that's what is happening with Rainbow Dash. A lot of people have talked about the whole ADHD aspect. It comes down to it's not working for her, therefore the problem is with Rainbow Dash. The problem isn't with Twilight's methods. Clearly it can't be Twilight's methods because it worked for Twilight, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's, it goes back to one of those things where some people learn differently. With the way Dash is, she's a very active character. You don't usually see her sitting around a lot studying like Twilight does. She's someone who's constantly moving, isn't usually sitting down a lot. And it kind of, going back to that, the way she acts in the show kind of reflects on the way that she learns. She can't exactly learn by just sitting down and listening to a lecture for a few hours.
Yeah, she's hands-on. She's kinesthetic learner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I guess, the entire Act 2 is the exploration of alternate learning modalities. And frankly, the fact that there's a cartoon that's doing that just still blows my mind. I couldn't be happier that they did that. And the way that they went about it is fantastic. They cover visual, auditory, kinesthetic, all of that. It's funny that Pinkie Pie was the one that points that out, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was very interesting with what Pinkie Pie, her method of learning.
I'm just surprised that she's really the one that even voiced that, because like Twilight is usually the one that Twilight knows all of this stuff, and Twilight's the one that almost causes the problem by trying to force Rainbow Dash into that classroom setting that doesn't work for her.
And like you said too, it's actually really awesome to see the staff of this show take this episode in this direction, because I could tell you countless cartoons that I watched when I was younger. Dexter's Laboratory, pretty much any cartoon on Cartoon Network where it involved some character trying to pass some test, it always revolved around them just constantly looking in a book and constantly studying. With this way, it shows them studying in these different methods that a lot of other shows don't really like to show.
I think a lot of other shows, they're not trying to focus on how to learn. They're talking about kind of determination and not giving up. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't mean that it necessarily will work or won't be painful, but yeah, it can be argued that if you try anything hard enough, eventually you might eke out some kind of grade, which they could have done. They could have had this episode being Dash wanting to give up, and eventually she gets like some kind of grade. She wouldn't get 100%, but they could have gone with that approach where she eventually manages to get something out of Twilight's methods. But I like all the gags that they managed to fit into the whole Act 2, the main six, using other methods of learning.
Oh, definitely. What Fluttershy did with all of their pets to reenact the history of the Wonderbolts.
Oh, God.
I'm pretty sure just about any fan of the show was completely rolling when that scene happened.
Well, as soon as it starts off, you have Opalescence and Angel dressed up as Celestia and Luna, wondering how this is going to play out. But yeah, right from the get-go, it's fantastic visuals. And it fits so tightly coupled to the story itself. It's not a gag that just manages to be fit in because of a location that they're in. It's a gag that works so well because it's part of the alternate method that they're using.
And then, towards the end of the play, things kind of go wrong, and Angel falls off the side of the set, and everything starts falling apart. And Pinkie Pie kind of jumps up out of nowhere, kind of like she usually does. And she explains her method. She says that some people learn by creating music or listening to music. And this is just another one of those big things that, it's something that My Little Pony Friendship is Magic has kind of become known for. All those references to other big cultures, shows, artists, musicians that, are outside of the show, where they bring in this influence of early 90s, late 80s rapping with Run DMC and Flavor Flav. I mean, what Pinkie Pie is wearing just screams Run DMC.
I am so glad that I avoided some of the promo material that had that, because that would have just ruined that moment in the show for me, and I hate that. When it goes into that 4:3 aspect ratio and kind of that VHS, that video effect filter over it, that was surreal almost, and completely perfect for Pinkie's character as well.
And this is, another one of those scenes where, like I mentioned on the last episode review that I was on, to see what they did with this scene, you could tell that somewhere along the line, the budget for the show has definitely gone up, because they put a lot of effort into the scene to make it look different from the rest of the show. The aspect changing, the effects overlaid on it to make it look like it's playing off of an old VHS, that's something that you never would have seen in Season 1 and Season 2 before.
It's a bit of an investment for a very small scene. Yeah, it's not creating a new asset when they went to Appaloosa. Obviously, there was a lot of new assets that had to be created because they're in a completely different location. And they're going to be there for almost the entire episode. But here it's a one-off. Well, Pinky's character's doing this for one scene, so we need to figure out how to do all of this and create these assets.
They even had the time to go about for just like it's like a 40, 50-second scene to plan out what all the artwork was going to be like in the background, because that's all stuff that, you have to create, and all the graffiti and stuff they probably had to make. And even the finer details too, like they had to think about the choreography of it and the way they dance. They had to bring, that style of dancing from that era, and they definitely nailed it spot on. The way that she moves her hooves and the way that the two other characters in the background are dancing with her and chiming in when she's in the middle of rapping. Like that, they put a lot of thought into just this little scene right here.
Well, that's one of the times you really have to give a lot of the credit to the storyboarders, because a lot of what ends up in the episode isn't necessarily written in the script. And I'm not trying to sell Amy short, not by a long shot, but a lot of those little moments that really stand out to people, the visual aspects, end up being further down the line, the storyboarders and some of the animators. And it seems like the storyboarders, they have a little more freedom in terms of kind of the expressions that they're doing, how they're using the characters. Maybe more of that is just being comfortable using the characters for so long. They kind of know what they can do, what they can get away with.
Which I find it funny too, since this is just another one of those references that they're kind of tossing into the episode too, the choice in characters that they have. I believe that that's Doctor Who's in the background, and the fact that they have DJ Pon 3 playing the music. Those are two, like, highly loved fandom, almost named characters that they tossed in. They could have tossed in, any other background characters to do this, but they picked those. And that's just another one of those signs where either the writers are starting to have fun with it, or more obviously, the storyboard artists and the people who animate the show are really having fun with it.
But also consider this. If you were a storyboarder and you were given that scene, that's like waking up on Christmas Day. You're not animating a scene of the characters walking through town, or it's kind of hovering on a cloud background with their wings kind of flapping. You get to do the damn music video, and you're gonna take advantage of that, because you don't get those scenes every day, right?
No, you don't. I mean, I can't say that I've ever seen any characters in the show so far skateboarding. I mean, the closest that I've seen any character do that is Scootaloo with their scooter.
Scooter, yeah.
So that's also another interesting thing too. It's confirmed, hey, they can skateboard in Equestria too. Awesome.
I do almost wonder how much of that was written into the script, though, because the Pinkie Pie thing ends up being a running gag throughout the rest of the episode. They bring it up a couple times with her trying to rap, and they even just have her reacting to Twilight's plan at Act 3 with, "That's interesting," puts on her hat, and accompanied by the record scratch, right?
I'm pretty sure that that's probably something that they just ended up making reoccurring, because this has happened in other episodes too, where Pinkie jumps in with one of her random shenanigans, and it kind of like hints at it and it keeps repeating throughout the episode.
They love that moment, and they can't not put it in again, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the long 6-minute tangent on the music video.
And a well-deserved tangent at that. Well, that basically leads into Act 3, doesn't it? Dash basically gives up. She's tried all of these methods.
Yeah, pretty much she's gotten to the point to where she already went over what Rarity tried helping her with, and Rarity's fashion line didn't even really seem to work with any of the characters from what they were making it sound like. And Applejack pretty much just didn't have any chime in at all, because she came in saying that, oh, well, I have my methods of learning by having experience already in what I do. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, really, if you think about it.
It is. Another way that you you end up learning things is just through experience. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that doesn't work so much for taking tests.
No.
But I think a big part of Act 3 is that's really where you see the change, the reaction to Dash of this whole process, where she is just, she's checked out. She's given up. She even says she's given up. Even during Twilight's plan, when they're flying along, she's just talking about how she has to work on a rock farm now, or she'll end up digging ditches, and it could be an incredibly dejecting experience to to go through something like she is, especially when a lot of people only have the option of a classroom setting. And people keep telling you that, you're not trying or you're stupid because it's not working, despite the fact that, you may be giving it all that you can.
And the big thing with Rainbow Dash on this too is the fact that, this isn't just any ordinary test. It's not like some English test or math test. This is a test for her to become a reserve Wonderbolt. Something that she's been talking about since season 1 that she's wanted to do. So this is like her ultimate dream. So the fact of her thinking right now that she can't pass this test, that's pretty much her dreams being shattered in front of her face right now. So she's at that point where it's pretty much her all-time low in the episode where she just wants to give up on everything.
And that's an interesting experience to be facing too, because we already know Dash would be an amazing Wonderbolt.
Mm-hmm.
And she, in the Rainbow Falls episode, she even teaches the Wonderbolts about loyalty. From the beginning of season 1, whenever she's encountered them, they've been impressed by her skills. I mean, she's perfect for it. And here's this little moment, this thing that is completely outside the domain that she really feels she needs to operate in to be a Wonderbolt, that is going to completely hold her back from that. And I think that, again, that's something that is more common than we kind of realize.
And I want to chime in on this too, because I'm sure just about every military brony out there this morning, anyone that works in any paramilitary workplace like police, fire, EMS, anything like that, they probably really felt this part of the episode because it chimes into where, everybody knows that Rainbow Dash can easily become a Wonderbolt, but she still has to pass all the tests just like everyone else. She has to go through all the classroom training just like everyone else. And more importantly, she has to know where that career came from. You got to know your roots to it too. And that's one of the things that knocks out a lot of people from those careers, is not being able to pass the book smarts of it. And, that eventually leads into them coming into the end of this little scene right here where suddenly in the middle of Twilight trying to talk to Rainbow Dash, she just shoves her out of the way. And, everyone's thinking, oh, well, she probably just got to the point to where she snapped. She's about to go ape on everyone. But come to find out that actually this is where it starts to show Rainbow Dash has a way of learning. Twilight finds out that Rainbow Dash, whenever she flies, she's keeping an eye on everything. She's keeping an eye on the ground, what's in front of her, what's behind her, who she's talking to. And she starts teaching Twilight something in this episode now, where, Twilight's still a new flyer. Obviously, she hasn't had wings forever. And she was saved from being run into a helicopter, which could have injured her.
Yeah, and it really is the turning point. That is the start of Act 3, where Twilight pretty much realizes that she was part of the problem. They were all focused on, these methods aren't working for you because you're not doing X, Y, and Z, as opposed to looking to Dash to say, well, what works for her? Not, well, we're going to do the shotgun approach. These are your choices. Pick one, right?
It's almost like one of those things where throughout the episode, they were trying to force things on her that they liked. Like, they were trying to force her a burger with ketchup, even though she didn't like ketchup. Things like that. And they never really went about to ask her, how do you learn? What have you noticed in the past?
Well, it's a bit of almost survivorship bias or something like that, because they're picking the methods that worked for them. Mm-hmm. Because to them, that's, this is clearly a successful method because it has worked for me. As opposed to realizing that what we know is a personal experience. Just because something works for us doesn't mean it's going to work for other people. And there's going to be that bias if you look to yourself, if that's your source, not what you know in terms of learning methods, but what necessarily worked for you.
Mm-hmm. And this leads into Twilight flying back to the other 4 characters and telling them, hey, I found out how she learned. And they plan out this huge plan to where all of their friends reenact, everything that they've been trying to teach Rainbow Dash this whole episode, to be on the ground where Rainbow Dash is, I want to say unconsciously, like she's paying attention to it. It gets to the point to where when she's flying over, her conscious isn't really all there paying attention to the ground, but everything happening on the ground is still sinking in to her mind.
Well, that was a great moment, and you know what's going to happen when she goes back and tells them. In fact, when Rainbow Dash is saying, well, I was paying attention to this and this and this, you know where it's going to go from there. You know where the episode is going to go. It's one of those times when they don't really pull any surprises. You know the direction that they need to take it. But I love that they really hide that reveal until you see it work with Dash, until she kind of says, well, how do I know all of this stuff? Because when she's flying with Twilight the first time, it kind of cuts between showing them flying head on, and then it shows their silhouettes in the ground as they're passing over the town. And you see the things that she noticed later. You see the CMC come out, you see Filthy Rich and Big Mac. And when they're flying the second time, the entire time, it's this tight shot on them with just the clouds in the background. So you don't see what's going on. And it's nice that they save that for the end, you know?
And the cool thing about this episode, too, which I feel like I haven't seen it a lot in the show. Like, usually, you know, a lot of these episodes end with some moral where a character learns something. But this is one of those episodes where it wasn't just one character learning something, and even Twilight says that. She says, I learned something. So on top of Rainbow Dash learning her method of learning, Twilight also learns something too, and she pretty much starts blurting out the entire moral of the episode right there in her journal. She goes on to talk about one method of learning may not always be better than another.
Well, with the lesson, I think that is where this episode really hit the home run, is that it wasn't focused on that Dash passed the test.
And then, you know, after Twilight finishes writing her journal entry, it leads into the part where Rainbow Dash goes in, she does her test, and the character that's sitting behind the desk, he stamps a 100% sticker on it. So this is another one of those points where it kind of cliffhangs again like it did in the past season, where she passed the initial academy for the Wonderbolts. So obviously, according to the storyline now, what happened in this episode, she's a reserve in the Wonderbolts. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this will play out in a later episode on what that means, like what her new job will be.
Well, we've had from the get-go the plot lines for a lot of these characters set out. We knew that, well, something is going to happen with Rainbow Dash and the Wonderbolts. It has to. We don't know exactly when, but like the CMC, we've seen a lot of changes with the CMC, especially in Season 4. And I think that they really need to set up a lot of these changes that are going to take place with the characters, this progression through their character arcs. Because if we never set that up, or we don't give some episodes dedicated to it, at some point, all of a sudden, it'll be poof, something changes. We saw that happen with Princess Twilight. And I think if there had been more setup to that, it would have been more accepted. Just isn't to say that they haven't done a good job with it, but I think that part of the problem is that we didn't have these moments like we're seeing here with Rainbow Dash, where we're seeing that growth, that progression along the character arc to at some point where we can accept she's a Wonderbolt now.
And this is, you know, just one of those awesome things to where you can really see that the characters have just been slowly growing more and more in this show. And some people might complain, I'm sure, about it, saying like, oh, well, Rainbow Dash is one step closer to being a Wonderbolt. This must be the end of the show. The fandom's dying, blah, blah, blah. I think, if anything, this is going to open up a lot of new doors, like what happened with Twilight becoming an Alicorn. I can trust the writers enough after talking to some of them in person at conventions about the show and hearing them say time after time, no matter how many episodes they write, the majority of the show will still be there. Just like what's happened with Twilight. She may have grown a pair of wings, but she's still in Ponyville. She's still on all of these adventures with their friends. It may be a little bit different on some of these episodes now, but it's still somewhat the same, where they keep that core kind of structure there still. So if anything, it's going to be cool to see what's going to happen now with the other characters, because obviously Rainbow Dash just made a big step, so now the big question is, what's going to happen with the other characters? What's their next big step going to be?
And that's something that I think we're just going to have to see how it plays out, because it's up to the writers to say, well, when are we moving this character to kind of the next step along their arc? And I agree wholeheartedly. We've seen in Season 4, not only is Twilight growing into her role as a princess, teaching more, but she's still learning. So a lot of the same aspects of her character that were there before are still there. She's the same person. things have changed, though, and that's part of life. And I think that that's something that with these changes, whether it's to the CMC or any of the main six, that is something that they really need to teach. That's something that eventually the show is destined to cover. Are these changes that happen in life that you may not wish happen, but ultimately it's things that people face, and it's things that people need to be prepared how to face, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when we start getting those kinds of episodes, I think that that's potentially some of the best work that we're going to see. And as far as lessons, some of the best lessons that we could see from the show. But ultimately, that's one of those things that you know what's coming. You don't necessarily know when. There's some realism to that, I guess. But yeah, that's just how it is.
Which I still like how the writers of the show, even though they're closing another one of those chapters, they leave a whole bunch of new ways that the show could go from that episode.
Exactly. It's opening an entire world of possibilities for Rainbow Dash's character, even. Now, I guess going back to how we started this review with the Twilight and Dash pairing, we've seen that before, and I think that you had mentioned when we were talking earlier that this episode really felt similar to another episode we've seen in the show, right?
At the beginning of this episode, it almost felt like it was their Read It and Weep episode where they introduced Daring Do for the first time. It was kind of like that thing where Twilight was trying to show Rainbow Dash something that she didn't like, and she kept telling Twilight, "Oh, you're an egghead. Oh, I'm not book smart. I can't do all this studying stuff. I can't do this stuff that you do." But then in Read It and Weep, she ends up trying it and she really loves it. With this episode, she gives, Twilight's methods of studying a try, and almost halfway through that part where Twilight's trying to teach Rainbow Dash, she just ends up not liking it. And it's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
That would have been a terrible episode. What would you have called it? Rainbow Dash discovers the magic of learning or something?
Another Reading Rainbow episode.
Oh, dear. It definitely started off like that episode, but again, I was talking to Raldan earlier, and I really like kind of the angle that they had mentioned, where this really parallels Mystery on the Friendship Express, because it's got all those little segments that each have their own kind of vignette, their own style to it, right? Where you have the play in the classroom setting and the rap video, and back in Mystery on the Friendship Express, it was all these different mystery styles, right? Where you had the secret agent and you had Sherlock Holmes and you had all those little vignettes through the episode. And I think I agree with him that that's, in terms of, I guess, the elements with which they tell the story, it really parallels that, even though the plots are completely different.
Now, during this scene with this music video, one of the things that I noticed this morning, and usually when I watch these episodes live, I like to live tweet a little bit. I noticed that they mentioned General Firefly. And Firefly is a G1 character. She's actually one of my favorite G1 characters. She was in the initial pilot movie. Come to find out, when I tweeted that out, that I said, hey, cool, awesome, they put a mention of my favorite G1 character in. Amy Keating Rogers actually tweeted at me saying, "I'll be honest, I didn't know it was a G1 pony. That just came from my brains." And it was really hilarious to see her tweet that at the time, because after they kept mentioning Firefly, everyone was on all of these different tangents on what that could mean. A lot of people thought that it was hints at Warren, and a lot of people thought that it was, was it a hint at a G1 character? So it's one of those things where the writers kind of stumbled upon something they didn't even really realize.
Well, it's just one example of these episodes being so dense as far as the references that every scene contains. Sometimes people see things that aren't actually there, so this happens to be one of those times. Well, that's about all the time we have. Once again, my guest this week was Kibby.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on again. It was awesome doing this.
No, thank you. And tune in next time for a review of Season 4, Episode 22, Trade Ya. This has been EFN Presents. Thanks for watching.